Hey, well, I'm Robert Starling. I'm a producer.
Okay, we've totally lost you.
Oh,
Okay,
audio before.
I hear you now.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll lean in and hopefully it'll be a little better then. Robert Starling. I'm a writer, producer, director. Been in film and television about 50 years, and I love science fiction. Robert Heinlein was favorite and still is my favorite author. Did my high school term paper on his future history series. So it may give you an idea of my fandom, if you will, for how realize that they probably in determining the title for this panel, they say from Herbert to Heinlein, probably just because they both start with H. I did when I was writing my term paper, I actually wrote to Heinlein and asked him a couple of questions. And long after the paper was due, turned in and graded and everything else, I finally got a little postcard from him, a little blue postcard. It just said, normally when you write somebody and ask them for information, they you send the stamped self-addressed envelope. So he was kind of being nasty to me.
Okay, our hero. Jessica, can you hear us? Okay. Hopefully her situation will get resolved. So I'm Eric Swedin. I am a professor of history at Weber State University. I'm also a science fiction writer and scholar. I have 11 books published. Half of them are novels. My biggest claim to fame was about 10 years ago. One of my novels won the Sidewise Award for the best alternate history book of the year. It was an alternate history of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And my background with regards to media is a couple of documentaries were made that were partially based on that book. And that was an interesting experience. And so what I want to start off with is, Jessica, you're blinking in and out. Ah, look at that. Can you hear us, Jessica?
Can you see me?
I can see you.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I can't hear either of you. I just logged out and came back in, and now I can't hear anything, but my video is working.
And we can hear you good.
I have no idea what to do. I can hear that.
Okay, so you can hear our helper.
Have Nick take me out and bring me back in again.
Okay.
So sorry. I haven't touched anything.
Wonders of modern technology. One of the things that came up at one time was that how quickly we first something is a miracle when it happens. It's just wonderful, and then how quickly we grow impatient when something goes wrong or whatever, and forget that the very existence of it is a kind of a miracle to start with.
It's true. I've imagined what it'd be like to go back in time like 40 years, and I would be horrified trying to watch television. I love HD TV and I love quality television, and I wouldn't get it back then. So, all right, getting closer.
Back when television itself was a bit of a science fiction. Saw in the movies. We got our first TV when I was about years old.
So you remember before television in your household?
I do. I remember listening to radio dramas and enjoying yours truly, Johnny Dollar, detective with an expense account.
Well, I'm not as old as you, but I also remember life before television because we actually lived in a dead zone where we couldn't pick up television signals. And then when I was 15, cable came in. Boy, that was a big difference.
Columbus, Georgia, which is the second largest city in Georgia, but I can remember when the first television show I saw was a friend invited me over to his house, and he had this big, tall antenna, must have been 60, 70 feet high. And he was picking up a station out of Atlanta. It was very snowy, and it was a Hopalong Cassidy Western.
Okay.
There was a furniture store that was on the way home from church. And on Wednesday nights after Mutual, we would go by the furniture store, and they had rigged up a speaker so that you could hear, and they had a TV in the window. And we would stop and kind of gather around the TV in the window and watch old Sherlock Holmes with Basil Rathbone.
Yeah. It's interesting how fast media has come to completely saturate our society and how fast the quality of technically what you're getting has really improved. And then, of course, the amount of money is being spent right now on new content creation, other than the problems with the pandemic, is unbelievable. It seems like any property of quality or popularity, someone's trying to make that into a show now. Well, Jessica, we're feeling bad. Well, why don't we, since we assume we have an audience and hopefully Jessica will be able to rejoin us, wanted to point out that we do need to remember up front that books and even graphic novels are a different form of media than movies or television shows. And television shows that are designed for an environment where they have to be supported by advertising are going to tell stories substantially differently than television shows that are designed for streaming, where you don't have an advertising interruption and you don't have that rhythm of a hook just before every commercial break. So that being said, I think we all have favorite movies that we just either love or despise, or favorite TV shows we love or despise because of what they did to something that we loved in a different form of media. Do you have some examples, Robert, of that for yourself? We're not okay.
Gone too far in terms of comparing books and movies. Most of the time, I either haven't read the book or haven't seen the movie. So, although it was interesting in preparing for this today, I was reading something that Orson Scott Card had said, and he brought out the point that whenever you sit down and you read a book, and sometimes it can take you hours and hours or several days or whatever. You're going to try to compress that into a hour and a half or 2 hour movie. There's so much that you have to lose. So there's just inherent in the medium the fact that you're not going to be able to get all the things in. Now, sometimes it's good. I know when I saw the Atlas Shrugged trilogy, 3 movies made from one book.
It's a big book.
It is a big book, but I was delighted to see that some of the long speeches that were obviously politically motivated in the book were omitted in the movie. It made it move a lot faster.
But if I may, I have not read the book or watched the movie, but the entire point of that book was to be politically motivated.
Right.
So is the movie living up to what the book was supposed to be?
Yeah, the movie actually did do that. It was it kept the message of the book, but without the long pedantic speeches that some of the characters gave in the book.
Okay, that's interesting. Jessica, can you hear us?
I can hear you perfectly. I'm hesitating to turn on my camera just because that seems to be where everything goes awry.
Right.
I might just sit here and talk for a minute with no camera on.
Okay, so we were talking about some examples of books that or movies that we really enjoyed the adaptation or we really didn't like the adaptation. And we haven't really talked about anything of substance yet, so other than Atlas Shrugged. And
I think that Stardust, the movie, is honestly better than the book. Like, they did some really fun things with the characters. It's a Neil Gaiman book.
right.
It's a lovely fantasy, but the movie just has such such fun, because Michelle Pfeiffer as the witch is so good, and oh my gosh, what's his name? That's Captain Shakespeare.
Yeah, De Niro.
Robert De Niro is so fantastic and so unusual in that part, which was basically rewritten for him in the movie. Like, I think it's delightful, and it has a happy ending because the book does not. The book does not have a happy ending. The book has kind of a bitter ending, to be honest. It's sort of well, what do you expect? This isn't a real fairy tale kind of thing. Like, and the movie has such a lovely ending. I love that.
It's interesting as a literary observation. The Little Mermaid is also
horrible.
The movie has a much better ending than the book, where Hans
Christian Andersen was just, I don't like him. I don't like any of his stories. There's a whole long story too about what a horrible house guest he was. He stayed with the Dickens family for like 3 months, and like they couldn't get him out of their house. Like, their one daughter wrote to her friend and said, "There's a terrible storm has hit our home from Denmark and I wish to leave." And so she went and lived with a friend until he left, because he was just like, they said he just sat there all day drinking, being depressed, and expecting them to entertain him. And he was there for like 4 months in their house. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds about right.
Interesting.
So yeah, I think any adaptation of The Little Mermaid tends to do that. A lot of the fairy tale stories, a lot of the Disney versions, I know people act like, oh, Disney, oh, they made it so Disney. But you know, the original story is pretty horrible. So if you want something like what we think of as a happily ever after, a fairy tale ending, usually comes from the movie and not the book.
It's true.
Snow White that's her mom, not her stepmom, for one thing, that's trying to kill her so that she can be the most beautiful. And she's made to dance. The queen is made to dance away in like red hot iron shoes and stuff until she dies at their wedding. It's so gross. So
yep.
I'm gonna risk it.
Look at that. You did it. And you're live. Can we see you?
We'll see.
Can you hear us still?
Well, let's talk about...
We never had Jessica introduce herself.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Will you introduce yourself for the people that don't know who you are?
I'm Jessica Day George. I'm a best-selling author of 16 fantasy books, all of them middle grade or young adult. But I'm also a huge movie junkie. And back in the day, like in college, my husband and I and some friends actually used to have a movie blog in the early days of blogging. We ran a movie blog and it was just us talking about movies we loved or hated. And funny story, I used to just use my initials to sign off, like JDG. And after a couple of years, we actually put our pictures on the blog, and it turned out that most of the dozen people that read our blog thought that I was a man because of my taste in movies. Because like the one year my favorite movie was the Fast and the Furious, the first Fast and Furious movie. I'm like, this is amazing and has franchise potential. And I was right. And like I had like such like action and sci-fi movie taste that they assumed that I was a guy. So
interesting.
Anyway. Well, let's talk about Dune. We're going to talk about Dune.
Go ahead. What is your favorite version of Dune? Jessica, you have opinions on this.
The book. I still have my original Dune storybook from the movie, but just because Dune the book is one of my all-time favorite books, and so I just sort of like anything I could get my hands on Dune related. So I have like multiple copies. I have an illustrated edition. I have a pop-up, a Dune pop-up and stuff. And so, and I got that from my older sister. And so she loved Dune and was so excited to see the David Lynch movie. She was a teenager when it came out and went to see it with my mom. And they went to see some special version where like, it was like a special event where they actually handed them a booklet that explained about the Butlerian Jihad and stuff like that, like with storyboards so that you could actually follow the movie. And I think that is when they should have known it was a failure. If you have to give your audience reading materials to look at for a few minutes before the movie starts because they won't understand what they're seeing on the screen, your movie has failed. I don't mind, you know, I don't think it's such a sacred cow. I don't think anything ever is that like, oh sure, they have to change it. You may or may not like it, but I don't hate anything because they took out my favorite part. As long as there's a reason why they did it. The David Lynch Dune is so botched that an average person can't follow it. If it seems like gibberish, then you failed. If in order to make something like that with sandworms and people having, you know, spice visions and stuff, if you have to cut some of that out, that's one thing. But if you have to hand them a booklet to explain what's going on, you failed. I actually think the miniseries, the Sci-Fi Channel miniseries from a few years ago, did a really excellent job. They probably had a bigger budget. They certainly had better special effects. And
they did not have a bigger budget.
Oh, they didn't?
So you may not be aware of this, but the David Lynch version of Dune, they burned through $40 million, which was their budget, and they did not film the entire script. David Lynch was used to making small movies. It was too big of a project for him. He failed. There is a version you can see of the David Lynch film that his name is removed from. And what it is...
The Alan Smithy version.
The Alan Smithy version that adds all the extra storyboards of what the movie was supposed to look like. And it's like...
Oh, I own it. I own this in a metal case. I have the complete box set with every version of that movie. And they're still terrible.
Well, I agree. I think that it was...
Every version is still terrible. We also own the complete, like, every version of Blade Runner. And every single one of them is good. I don't know what happened there. Dune is so terrible. And I also, a few years ago, watched the Jodorowsky's Dune, the documentary about the Dune that never got made.
Right.
Which is just fantastic. If you are a movie buff at all,